She has absolutely no idea what she's doing with that company, my brother said, not even looking at me when he said it. He was looking at the mediator. He was looking at my uncle. He was looking at anyone in that room who would give him the validation he needed. She's been bleeding it dry for 2 years and she doesn't even realize it. We need to step in before there's nothing left to save. I looked at my watch. 11 minutes. That was how long he'd been talking. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't shift in my chair. I took a slow breath and let him keep going. If you've ever sat across a table from someone who knows you better than almost anyone in the world and watched them lie about you with complete confidence, drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of us have been in that room. How many of us have had to sit there and swallow it whole? My brother's name is Derek. He's 41. He has a firm handshake, a good haircut, and a way of talking that makes everything he says sound reasonable even when it isn't. He's the kind of person who uses words like fiduciary in casual conversation and expects you to be impressed. Growing up, I thought he was the smartest person I'd ever meet. I was wrong. He was just the loudest. The mediation had been his idea. He'd framed it as a family decision, something we could settle without lawyers and courts and public record. He'd called our Uncle Gary, who'd called our mother's side of the family, who'd called our 2 cousins who had no real stake in any of this, but showed up anyway because Derek told them to. He'd packed the room, just like my father used to pack a room, with people who already agreed with him before anyone said a word. I was 28 when my mother died. She left me 49% of Callaway Home Goods, a small batch candle and home fragrance company she'd built from her kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio. She left Derek 51%. He became majority owner. I became, in his words, a minority stakeholder with operational input. I was also the one who had been running day-to-day operations for 3 years while my mother's health declined. But that detail had a way of disappearing from Derek's version of events. For the first 2 years, I tried to work with him. I gave detailed monthly reports. I brought in new wholesale accounts. I renegotiated our supplier contracts and cut our cost of goods by 18%. I responded to every email. I answered every call. I sat through every phone meeting where he questioned decisions I'd already made and taken credit for results he'd had nothing to do with. He lived in Phoenix. He visited Dayton 4 times in 2 years. Each time he left with a longer list of complaints and a stronger opinion about how I was doing everything wrong. The mediation was supposed to be his clean solution. He wanted to buy me out. Not at fair market value, at a number his accountant had produced, a number that valued the company at roughly 60% of what I knew it was actually worth. He'd brought the documents already printed. He brought a pen. He thought I was going to sign. I looked around the table. My Uncle Gary, who hadn't spoken to my mother in 6 years before she got sick. My cousin Bree, who'd borrowed money from my mother twice and never paid it back. My cousin Marcus, who I genuinely liked but who had no idea why he was there. Derek's financial advisor, a man named Paul who had the energy of someone who'd been told this would be a quick meeting. And then there was Rebecca, the mediator. A woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that suggested she'd seen this exact dynamic approximately 300 times. "Claire," Rebecca said, turning to me, "would you like to respond?" Derek leaned back slightly. He thought this was his moment. He'd laid out a 20-minute case for why I was incompetent, financially reckless, and emotionally too close to the business to make rational decisions. He'd used the phrase, grief-driven mismanagement, twice. He'd mentioned that I was still living in my mother's house, which he called the family home, as if that meant he had some claim to it, and suggested that my attachment to the physical space was clouding my judgment about the business. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to defend myself, to get loud, to prove that I was the emotional one he'd described. I'd spent the last 8 months making sure I didn't give him that. There's a concept in dealing with manipulative people where you strip all the emotional charge out of your responses. You become factual. Boring, almost. You stop giving them the reaction they're fishing for, and they start to flounder because they don't know how to operate without it. I'd read everything I could find on the subject after the 3rd time Derek had sent me a 10-paragraph email clearly designed to provoke a response he could screenshot and forward. I'd started keeping records. I'd started being very, very quiet. "Yes," I said. "Thank you, Rebecca. I do have a response." I didn't open the folder in front of me yet. I looked at Derek directly. His expression was pleasant, practiced. "My brother is right that revenue in Q3 last year was down 14%, I said. He left out that it was down industry-wide by an average of 19%, and that Callaway outperformed our 3 closest competitors during the same period. He also left out that Q4 recovered fully, and that we just closed our largest wholesale contract to date in January. But I understand why he left those parts out." Derek smiled tightly. "Claire, this isn't about one quarter. I'm not finished," I said. Not loudly, not rudely, just clearly. Rebecca held up one hand, and Derek stopped. Here's what I hadn't told anyone in that room, what I hadn't told Derek, or Uncle Gary, or Rebecca, or Paul the financial advisor with his pre-printed buyout offer. For the past 8 months, while Derek was building his case for why I was failing, I had been doing something else entirely. I knew this mediation was coming. Derek isn't subtle. He'd started CCing our uncle in emails 6 months before he suggested it. He'd started requesting financial documents he'd never asked for before. He'd started calling suppliers. I know because 2 of them told me because I'd built actual relationships with these people and they thought I should know. He was preparing. So I prepared differently. I requested an independent business valuation from a firm in Columbus that had no relationship with either of us. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Dana who specialized in small business disputes, and I paid her retainer in cash from my personal savings because I didn't want any unusual expenses showing up on the company books before I was ready. I had 3 years of financial records audited independently, and I did one more thing. Something that Derek had given me the idea for without realizing it. He had mentioned in a group email 8 months earlier that he was exploring strategic options for the company. I didn't know what that meant at the time, so I did some research. What I found was that he had been in preliminary conversations with a regional home goods distributor in Cincinnati, a company called Hargrove & Sons, about a potential acquisition. He hadn't disclosed this to me. He had a fiduciary obligation to disclose it to me. He hadn't. I'd kept that piece of information folded up in my back pocket for 8 months. I'd let him make his plans. I'd let him prepare his documents and call his family allies and arrange this meeting. I'd let him believe I was the confused, grieving little sister who didn't understand the numbers. I opened the folder. "This is an independent valuation completed 30 days ago," I said, sliding a copy to Rebecca and placing one in front of Derek. "Callaway Home Goods is currently valued at $2.3 million. The offer my brother has proposed, and I have it here, values the company at approximately $1.4 million. He is asking me to sell my 49% for $680,000 when my actual share, at fair market value, would be approximately $1.1 million. The room went quiet. Uncle Gary looked at his hands. Marcus looked at the ceiling. Derek's jaw tightened. "That valuation is inflated. It doesn't account for it was conducted by Meridian Business Advisors out of Columbus," I said. "I'd be happy to provide their credentials. Rebecca, I can send those to you directly." Rebecca was writing something down. She didn't look up. "Please continue, Claire." Derek turned to Paul. They exchanged a look. Paul said something quietly. Derek shook his head. "There's also the matter of disclosure," I said. I watched Derek's face. Just for a second. Half a second. Something moved across it. He knew. He knew what I was about to say, but it was too late to stop it. "My brother has been in acquisition discussions with a company called Hargrove & Sons since last September. As a co-owner, he is legally required to disclose any material discussions that could affect the value or direction of the company. He did not disclose this to me. Not once. Not in any email, not in any call, not in any of our monthly check-ins." I looked at him. "I have the emails, Derek. One of their people knows someone on your team and thought I was already looped in. It was an honest mistake on their end. I appreciated it. Derek's face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. He landed on something that was trying very hard to be calm. Those were exploratory conversations, he said. Nothing formal. Nothing that required. My attorney disagrees, I said simply. And so does the language in Mom's operating agreement, which both of us signed. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter than that. It was the feeling of having carried something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. Derek had been doing this my whole life, not always with money. When I got into the honors program in 7th grade, he told my parents the teacher felt sorry for me. When I got my first real job after college, he told everyone at Thanksgiving that he'd put in a good word, which he hadn't. When I started working at my mother's company and it started growing, he started showing up more. Not to help, but to be adjacent to something that was working. I'd watched it happen my whole life, and I'd never had the language for it until I was 30, and I read a single paragraph in an article about covert, undermining behavior in family systems. I printed that paragraph out. I kept it in my nightstand for a week. Then I started paying attention differently. The mediation paused for a break. I stood, got a cup of coffee from the table against the wall, and looked out the window at the parking lot. My uncle came to stand next to me. He looked uncomfortable. He was a big man, and he had a way of taking up space without quite knowing where to put himself. I didn't know about the other company, he said quietly. I know, I said. He told me you'd run it into the ground. He tells people what works, I said, and took a sip of my coffee. When we sat back down, I could tell something had shifted. Paul was on his phone. Rebecca had spoken to Derek privately during the break. My cousin Bree was looking at me differently, not warmly, but with a new kind of attention, like she was recalculating something. Derek had 1 card left. I'd expected it because I knew him. She's been living in the house, he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate. Mom's house, for 2 years, rent-free. That has value. That should be factored into any settlement. Uncle Gary nodded slowly. He thought this was reasonable. She's not on the deed, Derek continued. The estate hasn't been fully settled, and she's been occupying the property, maintaining it, yes, but also benefiting from it. We should account for that. He was trying to muddy the water. If he could introduce enough complexity, enough disputed value, he could drag this out. He could make fair market value feel like an opening bid in a negotiation rather than a baseline. Rebecca turned to me. Claire, do you want to address the property question? I reached into the folder one more time. The house was transferred to me 14 months ago, I said. My mother updated her estate documents 8 months before she died. The house is in my name. The transfer is recorded with Montgomery County. I also have here a letter from my mother, written and notarized, explaining her decision. I set the document in front of Rebecca. There's nothing to factor in, it's my property. Derek stared at the page. He read it. He read it again. His mother's handwriting was on the letter, her actual handwriting, and a shaky version of the penmanship I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists and the notes she used to leave on the kitchen counter. He couldn't say it was fake. He couldn't say he didn't recognize it. He sat back in his chair like something had left his body. My mother knew. She'd known for longer than I had, probably. She'd seen Derek's pattern her whole life, and she'd loved him and tried to manage it, and eventually she'd gotten sick, and she'd gotten very clear about what she wanted to happen. She'd called me into her room one afternoon 6 months before the end, when she was still lucid and still sharp, and she'd said, I want you to have the house. I want you to have a place that's yours, that no one can come and take a piece of. She'd squeezed my hand and looked at me in the way she had when she was done talking and wanted me to understand that what she'd said was final. I'd made sure it was legal. Dana had helped me make sure it was iron solid. We'd been thorough. The buyout offer as presented is not acceptable, I said to Rebecca. My attorney has prepared a counteroffer based on the independent valuation. I'm willing to negotiate in good faith from that number. I'm also willing to consider an alternative structure in which I purchase Derek's 51% at fair market value, which, given the Hargrove discussions and the disclosure issue, he may find is the more comfortable option. Derek looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time since we'd sat down. He'd come in expecting to walk out with a signed paper and a settled estate and a smaller, simpler version of things he could manage from Phoenix. He'd expected me to fold, because I always had before. Every time he'd pushed, I'd found a way to accommodate. I'd told myself I was being the reasonable one, the low-drama one, the one who kept the peace. But I hadn't been keeping the peace. I'd been funding his ability to escalate because he knew that no matter how far he pushed, I would find a way to make it okay. Not anymore. The mediation ended without resolution that day, which is what I'd expected. Derek's attorney called Dana 3 days later. There were 2 more weeks of back and forth. Derek didn't buy me out. He couldn't at fair market value, and he knew it. Instead, I bought him out. Not at his number, and not exactly at mine. We settled at a figure that made Dana say, "I've seen worse," and made Derek go very quiet on the phone when the final number was confirmed. I signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in Dana's office. I drove home afterward and sat in my mother's kitchen, my kitchen, and made a cup of tea using the same kettle she'd had for 15 years. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I just sat there for a while in the quiet. There's a thing people say about family conflict, that you have to decide what the relationship is worth, what you're willing to give up to preserve it, what you're willing to tolerate to keep the peace. I believed that for a long time. I spent years adjusting myself to fit into the space Derek left me, making myself smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. What I learned, the thing I wish I'd understood earlier, is that some relationships have already been decided by the other person. Derek had decided a long time ago what I was worth to him. He'd decided I was useful when I was manageable, and a problem when I wasn't. No amount of accommodation on my part was going to change that calculus. The only thing that changed anything was when I stopped playing by the rules of a game he designed specifically for me to lose. My mother built Callaway home goods on her kitchen table with a double boiler and a notebook and the specific stubbornness of a woman who'd been underestimated her entire life. She left it to both of us because she believed in second chances even when she knew better. I think she also knew I'd be okay. She'd raised someone who knew how to wait, who knew how to watch, who knew that the right moment to speak isn't always the first moment you can. Callaway Home Goods is doing well. We expanded into 3 new retail accounts last spring. I hired 2 full-time employees and a part-time social media manager. I moved my mother's old sewing table into the corner of the production room because it fit there, and because I wanted it nearby. Derek and I don't talk. I'm not angry about that. I used to think I would be. I used to think there would be some version of events where we found our way back to something that resembled a normal sibling relationship. I don't think that anymore. Some doors close, and the right response is not to stand in front of them hoping they'll open again. The right response is to turn around and notice how much room there is behind you. Peace is not something you get handed, you build it. Sometimes quietly, over a long time, while someone else is busy being certain they've already won. I thought a lot about what actually happened in that room, not the legal part. I understood the legal part before I walked in. I mean what happened underneath it. Why Derek was so certain he'd already won. Why he'd invited Uncle Gary and my cousins and Paul with his pre-printed papers and his uncapped pen. He wasn't being strategic. He was being who he'd always been. Someone who'd learned early that confidence reads as competence, that volume substitutes for truth, that if you say a thing loudly enough in front of enough people, most people won't stop to check whether it's real. That's not cruelty exactly, it's a pattern, and patterns don't come from nowhere. Derek learned that I would adjust. I'd been adjusting my whole life, shrinking, accommodating, finding the version of events that made everything smoother for everyone. I thought I was being the mature one. What I was actually doing was teaching him that there were no consequences. You can't be angry at someone for learning the lesson you kept reinforcing. That's the part I had to sit with. Not what he did, what I'd allowed, without realizing I was allowing it. Every time I let something slide, every time I smoothed over an email or absorbed a dismissal or gave him partial credit for work I'd done alone, I was making a small, quiet deposit into an account he'd one day use against me. That's not self-blame. That's just cause and effect. Actions have weight even when you don't intend them to. What changed for me? What actually changed? Not in a dramatic moment, but slowly over about 6 months of paying close attention, was understanding that integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself about what's actually happening. I'd been telling myself a story about Derek that was more comfortable than the true one. The true one was harder to hold, so I'd softened it. And soft stories don't prepare you for hard rooms. The intelligence I needed wasn't cleverness. I'm not particularly clever. What I had was patience and the willingness to do the unglamorous work. Reading documents, building relationships with suppliers, hiring Dana, and paying her retainer out of my savings. Getting the independent valuation done 30 days before I needed it. None of that felt powerful while I was doing it. It just felt like homework. It felt like the kind of thorough, quiet preparation that no one sees and no one praises. But it was the only thing that actually mattered when it counted. And the resilience that came from my mother, honestly. Not from anything I figured out on my own. She built something real from nothing, and she did it without anyone handing her a roadmap. And she did it while raising 2 kids and managing a marriage and dealing with a world that didn't always take her seriously. She left me the house because she wanted me to have a foundation. She left me the company because she trusted me to keep building. The least I could do was make sure what she built didn't get taken apart by someone who'd never done the hard work of making anything. Derek walked out of that mediation a majority owner of nothing. I walked out the sole owner of something my mother started on a kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio. The math of that isn't complicated. What you protect, you keep. What you build, honestly, no one can argue away. And what you're willing to prepare for quietly, while someone else is busy being loud, that's where the outcome actually gets decided.